Welcome to Northwest Fencing Center's fencing series on YouTube. This is Coach Michael McTeague with you again, and today we're going to be talking about the setup of French grip épées. Now, there's an old joke about asking fencers to tell you about their fencing. And the punchline for épée fencers is, if you ask them to tell you about their fencing, they'll describe their equipment. This is probably more true of French grip épée fencers than any other type of fencer on the planet. We love our gear, and because fencing with a French grip relies so much on feel, how a weapon is set up and how it feels to us becomes ultra important. Sometimes maybe a little too important, but nevertheless it is an important part of what we're doing. And so you will see a real wide breadth of the way weapons are set up to fence with. So we're going to go through this kind of quickly. There's going to be some opinion involved, and one of the things that you need to understand is when you're talking about someone's personal preference and how they like something to feel, you're going to have an opinion. And when it comes to French grip épées, if there are 20 French grip épée fencers in a room, you'll have 25 opinions about how yours ought to be set up. There's only one that counts, and that's yours. Feel free to borrow from other fencers, try their weapons, and experiment. Find what works for you. So, let's start at the beginning. Here is your basic type of French grip. A wooden or plastic, or maybe sometimes a metal core. Most of the ones you find like this these days are a plastic core. It's got a leather wrapping around it, a couple of ferrules at either end to keep the leather from unwrapping, and this is something that you might find on a practice foil or a practice épée. Not generally what you'll find people using in competition, for the same reason you won't find people using this type of French grip in competition very much. They might start out there, but they rarely stay there. This is your usual, if you don't specify and you order a French grip weapon online, this is the few dollar weapon grip that you'll get for your weapon, and it's rubbery on the outside. There's a plastic in the middle. Why don't you typically see these used a lot of the time anymore? One of the primary reasons is they're extremely flexible. With that plastic on the inside, these things flex in your hand. So you have less control over what's going on in the blade because the grip itself is a little bit noodly. Most French grip fencers are not fencing with a traditional grip up close. Most of them are back at the end of the weapon with the pommel in the palm of their hand or somewhere in that range. So the weapon is farther out on this. They're getting a reach advantage. And so if this is flexing, in addition to the blade flexing, it's going to have an effect on your point control. Also, these are very, very skinny. They're very, very thin. And most people like to have a little bit more in their hand than something this narrow. Now, does that mean you won't see this getting used on a French grip fencer's épée in competition, and perhaps someone that's even quite effective? No, of course, you may see it. And if it's your thing, enjoy. But the level of variety that's available is astounding. All right, there are a host of people manufacturing. There are two in America that manufacture their own French grip. Two different companies that a lot of fencers go to. One is Harut. This is one of their grips. It's called a Mamba 2020. This particular one you'll see is a little hard against my black t-shirt here with the black grip, but this has got a plastic injection molded core with a little bit of a ferrule inside, and the grip is cast right into it. It's very shaped. There's a place that really your thumb falls into if you're pommeling the weapon, and it's a very square profile. You can see this very square profile to it, so there are pronounced corners. Some people like those pronounced corners so they can feel the indexing of the blade, which way is up. Another really common one is, and I'll get this out from behind my black shirt here. This is a Karma grip. This is from the Fencing Post. They do a lot of French grip weapons for people as well. And they also will typically do a covered pommel. Harut has a whole range of pommels they do as well. We're going to be getting into pommels and pommel shapes and coverings next, but this is another grip. Now this one you will see is essentially very much traditional. This is a traditional, what we call a Prior from France, a traditional wooden core grip. This one is even covered in a cotton twine, which was what you'd find a lot in the older weapons, and you still find a few people who like to do that. Very traditional. It's very straight. When you put the tang, bend the tang in the blade to get the amount of cant that you want. We talked about that in an earlier armory video, and we will talk about it again here. But if I sight down the hole in this, it's very straight. And if I sight down the hole in this, it is also straight. It's a very traditional shape, but the difference with it, I'm going to take an old one here that's got a cover that's ripping off. What you see on the inside is there's an aluminum core in this particular one. They also make one in a plastic core if you want a lighter weapon. Again, personal preference. I like the aluminum core. I want a very stiff grip. I don't want a grip that has any give to it at all. Somebody else may want to have a little give in their grip, or they may be a fencer that does not work the blade enough to cause the grip to flex much. Lighter fencers, smaller fencers aren't going to have the hand and arm strength. If I can name drop for a moment, national and NCAA fencer right now at Ohio State, Matthew Combs, is known for snapping wrench grips in his hand, where he actually goes to a particular supplier and gets a steel core grip, because even an aluminum core grip, he will snap it. He's very, very heavy on the blade. He's very strong. He's built like a linebacker, and he can go with a flick to somebody's arm or foot and literally snap the grip. A plastic core grip for that kind of fencer will not work. A fencer that's more into finesse and point control can get away with a lighter setup and may prefer to do that. Now you also have some other suppliers and types of grips. This has been recovered in a golf grip type material like the Karma grips are covered in. But this is actually a Schermasport or Schermasport grip from Italy. Here's another one, and the thing with those particular grips is that the aluminum that they're made of is slightly malleable, so with the right kind of anvil and hammer, you could put a little more bend or something into the aluminum core, but you have to be careful. It's pretty easy to crack any of these. You would not be able to do that with most grips. Like a PBT is another popular one from Hungary. Now with these grips and the PBTs, and also some people may remember this is a Coach Reith grip. Coach Reith was a coach here in America, and he discovered that if people had a thicker grip, they had a little bit better purchase on it. So he made an aluminum core that was very much like the Schermasport core, but he put several rounds of tubing finishing with a very sticky surgical tubing, and made a very, very thick grip compared to the thin Schermasport grip. These and the PBT grip, and also a grip that Harut makes that I'll show you in a minute called a System Pistol, and they all have a very distinct, it's probably easiest to see in this one, they have a very distinct bend to it. So if you go to sight down the center of this, it takes a bend. So when you're installing this on a grip, you have to duplicate that bend in the tang before you can slide it on. Probably the biggest mistake somebody makes when they first try to use one of these, or a PBT, or a Coach Reith, or a System Pistol, you will find that they'll bend it a little bit, they'll be able to get it part way down, and they'll figure, I'm just going to shove it on farther, or I'm going to hammer it down in. And they get it down part way and it gets good and stuck. And we can get it unstuck. You bring it to Armory, get it unstuck. The odds of they're getting it unstuck without breaking the wire, not great. You'll probably wind up rewiring it. So take your time. If this doesn't just slip on with very light pressure, then you haven't got the bend in the blade proper, and you're not going to be able to install a grip that requires a bend in the tang. And it's easy to identify which ones those are. Pick it up and try and look down it. Now, another one on the unusual department, but readily available, is Leon Paul makes what they call a tennis grip. And not surprisingly, it looks like the grip on a tennis racket. It's got that square profile, it's as straight as an arrow, it's made out of wood and carbon fiber, so it's very, very stiff, it's extremely light. It gets put on with a nut that goes down inside, and you use a longer wrench on it, but essentially it's held on in the same way that a pistol grip is held on. So even the tang is short rather than going all the way through the grip, as it would with a traditional French grip. Makes for a very light weapon, and there are some people that quite like this. Going a little further into the weeds, we have what Harut calls their system pistol, and I'm going to hold this out here to the side so you can see that this has a rather pronounced downward and inward, and it's also got an obvious spot here where your thumb is going to probably rest. And they typically pair this up with one of their drooping pommels, so that you have a grip on the weapon like this, where there's a lot of cant to the weapon, downward bend to it, and it's almost like having a pistol grip type of grip on it between the drooping pommel and the thumb rest, and yet it's not fixing the hand in one place, so it is legal. Some people love these. This is one of the ones where I really wanted to love this weapon. A weapon set up with one of these, but I really found it difficult to make the adjustment, and eventually I personally abandoned the effort, but there are several people in the club where I teach here that use this, love it, do great with it, so you have that option. That leaves us with a nice segue into pommels. The tang goes through the grip, sticks out the other end, and we screw a pommel onto it. Its primary purpose is to hold the weapon together, so we don't have a handful of parts rattling around, but it can serve several other purposes. First purpose, beyond holding it together, pommel has weight. You can move the balance point of the weapon towards or away from your hand by changing just the pommel, even if it's the same shape pommel, but it has a different weight. Some of them are bored out to make them lighter in the end. So you could get a pommel that's exactly like this pommel, but weighs 20, 30, 40 grams less. It would change the balance point of your weapon. So, normally paired up with your El Cheapo epee that you've ordered online is going to be a cheap standard pommel. There's nothing really wrong with it. It's there. It's aluminum. It's a steel. It's knurled on the end to give a little grip on your glove. You could put a couple of wraps of tape around it if you wanted to get a little more grip. It works fine, and you can get these in varying weights. One of the more popular ones, and I have a weapon here built with it. This is a pommel that's made by PBT. It's 140 grams or 145. I forget which, but generally 135 to 150 is a pretty typical range for a traditional type of pommel. Not the only way to go, and more you see people going way different ways with it. You can still get a pommel designed by Rick Zare that Leon Paul sells that's 200 grams. It's made of tungsten. I think Leon Paul still carries it. Um, it's heavy. It moves the weight way back on the weapon, changes the balance point a great deal. You also have pommels that are designed that are plastic. They can be maybe have a little lead shot put in them that they can weigh next to nothing, all the way up to maybe you probably couldn't get much beyond 85 or 90 grams with one of these, because most of it is plastic and there's not that much room to put lead shot or BBs in it. But if you're looking to build a really, really light weapon and you want the weight out towards the point, excellent choice. You have more traditional pommels. These are brass pommels. This one I happen to know is 130 grams because I had somebody make it for me on their lathe. It weighs exactly 130 grams. It has a really deep socket so that it really engages with the grip and makes it really, really stiff. And the original model for that, and really much easier to do, is to simply get somebody like Radical Fencing or somebody that imports them. And this is a traditional pommel from Prieur in France. 140 grams. A Prieur grip, or Prieur pommel, a Negrini Scammersport grip. You'll find that combination on a lot of French team members' blades. Fabrice Genet will fence with a weapon like that. Gauthier Grumier will fence with a weapon like that. Is it the only way to go? Of course not. Are other championship fencers fencing with other setups? You betcha. They're working with what works for them. And the idea is for you to know what these are, experiment, find what you like, and then sell off all the pommels and grips that you get collected, like I have here, to people that are doing their own experimentation. Now, while we're on pommels, shape. They can be shaped to a degree. The rules in the book say that as long as the grip and its pommel do not locate your hand in one position only, that you can smoothly move from one position to the other, up and down the grip, then it's okay. And it also will have to fit inside of the testing portion of the Garabit that the referee uses to test the weapons with, and we're going to get to that in a moment under rules. But the two primary sorts of shapes you find are, this is an oval, it's a little egg shape. Here is an original metal prototype of it that kind of gives you an idea what the shape looks like better. These were also designed by Rick Zayer, and they're called a palmel. And when you hold the weapon that's made with one of these, you can see that it fits in the palm of your hand if you are pommeling the weapon. And this can give you a little bit more torsional strength on the blade. And you notice that this one is not set up so that it's, it's not set up straight up and down. As you're looking at the end of this blade right now, you can see where this tape is. That's actually where the groove of the blade is, and you can see that the point of this is actually pointing off in this direction. For this particular fencer, or in this case coach, who coaches with this weapon, that is where they want to feel the indexing of the blade, and that's something that you can feel. By indexing of the blade, I mean how rotated it is one way or another. Pistol grip fencers set their blade up with a fixed indexing. They're holding it in a fixed way, and it's always the same. French grip fencers may change their grip, and sometimes we can, either through beats and multiple actions and things, sometimes we can lose track of how the blade is indexed, and this is one of the reasons some fencers like to use a shaped pommel, is to help them keep that indexing. So an oval shaped pommel can do that. You also have what's called a drooping pommel. Drooping pommel, it's round, but it droops down a little bit like an old pistol grip on like an old-fashioned pistol from the 1700s. Also originally designed by Rick Zayer, and now you can also get them from Harut and Fencing Post and probably 100 other places. Sincerest form of flattery being copying, but here is a drooping pommel. You can see that. And this particular one is held on with a as is the palm-shaped pommel. These are held on with a nut in the back, similar to the way a pistol grip would be put together, rather than screwing them on. And these go together. In this case, it goes like this, but could you use this on another grip? We could go right all the way back to our old wooden traditional Prior style grip. Could you put it on it? Absolutely, you could put it on it. You know, would this help your fencing? I don't know. You'll have to try it. And again, it can also be indexed one way or the other, so that it changes how the blade is clocked or indexed in your hand. So we have a world of different grips. We have a world of different pommels. It's almost, no, it's not almost, it's exactly like there are too many choices for one to just look at a bunch of them and say, that's the one, that's going to work. So when we set these up, we also have the rubber covering on the pommels. And this is probably the single most popular thing out there in terms of pommels. Getting the right weight, having the same grip covering on it. This is out of a Karma setup. Having the same grip covering on it that you have on there that gives you, if you're pommeling the weapon, a lot of traction for your glove on that part of the weapon. And that's the most common setup, and would look, would look mostly like something like that. But I want to save that particular one for later. So we have, here's a weapon that's set up. The bell guard's been bashed a bunch, and so now you can see it's starting to twist. This is something that happens over time, and you often have to take your bell guard off and rearrange it. This one's been bashed down here a whole bunch of times. And probably also, when you install a grip on the weapon, and it's going to have a cant to it, down or in. So let me get this off to the side here. So this is going to have a cant down. You'll see that this end of this grip is not cut straight off, right? It's got an angle to it. And you need to, with an aluminum grip or any grip that comes, you need to make sure that as your weapon goes together, the angle that's filed on the end of this matches the angle that it wants to meet the blade at. That also helps this sort of bell guard drift from happening. But it does happen anyway, and it happens through use as well, through the bell guard doing its job of protecting your hand. And on this one, if you actually look at the blade and how much down the blade is, this is fairly traditional. This is what we call a fairly traditional setup. There is some cant down and some cant in, so like maybe something on the order of 3 to 5 degrees in each direction. It's pretty straight. Not super straight, but pretty straight. So that if somebody is holding this defense with it, there's not, you can see that from the elbow to the tip, everything's pretty straight. There's not a lot of downward cant to it. It's a setup, people that like a lot of point control working around the hand may want to use this kind of a set, and it's also a setup that people who will occasionally come up and hold it in a traditional fashion will like as well. This location here against the wrist giving them a little more strength for their actions and also giving them a real sense of where the rest of the blade is. So that's a pretty standard setup. You can come to, this one happens to be set up, I call it Fabrice Genet style. There's a fairly substantial downward curve to this. There's a heavier pommel on it. And this is the sort of thing where, you know, again, if I grip this in the same way I was gripping the other one, you can see that there's a change in the way that the tip is on it. And if I can still choke up on it, but I might also be choking up on it with this underneath my hand for a little extra strength. This has got more cant downward and more cant in, which helps if your game is going to have more angulation to it, can be a help to it as well. Again, not the only way to set it up. but you will find this as fairly common. Now, you can set these up, but you have to follow a couple of rules, 2 primary rules, and these are the sorts of things where if someone on the strip is looking at your weapon, and those of you who have been fencing for a while with French grip will remember there was a time at nationals and at qualifiers where they would check our French grip weapons and stamp them. If you were fencing in an FIE tournament, that still happens. They're going to check your weapons no matter what you've got screwed onto the other end of them. French grip, pistol grip, a potato, they're going to check and make sure that it passes the rules. Those rules are primarily 2. They're going to take a gauge and they are going to measure the distance from the front of the bell guard to the back of, ooh, that's loud. They're going to measure to the back of the pommel from the front of the bell guard, and you'll notice that this measurement also is going to check that the bell guard is okay. Now this one, you can see that a referee or an armorer probably will let this go because this is so far within the regulation for length, but it really should be in a better way. For instance, if we go to this weapon, you can see that this is much straighter, but you can see it doesn't pass. It's too long. Not by much, but it's too long. So this would not be legal in competition. If we look at, whoa, knock that over. If we look at this, pardon the racket, if we look at this, we can see it's much more lined up. So we've got a nice thing, and this one is like hyper legal. It's well within the regulations for length. What are those regulations if I don't have one of these handy dandy things? You're looking for a bell guard with a depth of no more than 55 millimeters, and the length, overall length from the front of the bell guard to the end of the pommel of no more than 200 millimeters. All right, so again, we want that bell guard square with the blade. They do drift out either because we assembled it without properly facing the grip so that it matches the angle we've bent the tang to, or because it's just simply gotten bashed over time doing its job protecting our hand. Periodic maintenance, we may have to straighten that out, but that's what we're looking to do. We want to have that 55 millimeters happen there, nice and square to the blade, and no more than 200 millimeters overall length. Now, let me pick up this piece that I've been tossing around here. This is part of a Garabit. A Garabit is a large testing board, and if you were in an FIE World Cup, when you come in, you're going to hand an armorer your weapons, and they're going to take them back, and they're going to run them through this Garabit. And the Garabit is going to check the diameter of the bell guard, the length of the grip, the length of the weapon itself. Is it too long? It happens. Manufacturing tolerances, you may well wind up with a weapon that is too long. They're going to check it for all the dimensions that the rules stipulate. Now, one of those dimensions is the diameter of the bell guard, and for a French grip weapon, I cannot have this bend here. See if I can get this aimed up at you better. So you can see that grip has a downward and inward cant, but it cannot go beyond the outside of the bell guard. And the way they test that is to hold the weapon at the tip and slide it into this grip and back out. Now you notice that one had a little trouble getting in. Well, it's not because this was hitting, but it had a little trouble getting in because you can see it's beat up. It's not quite round. This bell guard needs to be taken off, brought back to examined for cracks, dents knocked out of it, and brought back to round so that it fits through the Garabit. We can test this weapon. This is our traditional pretty straight one, and odds are, as long as it's not dented up, it's going to go through just fine. All right? If it hangs up in there, either because this isn't round anymore or because my weapon is bent too far out, then my weapon is going to be deemed illegal, and I will have to give it to the referee, and I'll get my yellow card, and I will have to go to one of my backups, and let's hope that one passes. How far can I go with this, and what other little sneaky tricks do people pull in order to get more cant or bend into the tang of their weapon? For some fencers, they feel this is an advantage to their style of fencing. You can argue that all you want, but if you are one of those fencers, how far can you go, and what could you do to change things? Here is a weapon with a rather extreme amount of cant, and this thing looks like it would be illegal, but it's not. This lefty fencer has got a tremendous amount of inward cant on the weapon and downward cant in the weapon. How did they get that to pass? Well, you'll notice that even though this is a lefty weapon, they have the bell guard oriented or clocked like a right-handed epee, not having the wide part to the outside and up, but to the inside and down. And this allows them to put a lot more downward and inward bend on their weapon than they would be able to do with a standard setup. Is this illegal? Nope, it's not. They can do that. They're not exceeding the limits of the bell guard. What's the trade-off? Well, the outside of their hand is more protected. But for this particular fencer, they tend to fence with their hand way to the outside anyway. So they're protecting it with their hand with positioning and less with the bell guard itself. Because they're fencing French grip, they're less likely to be using the bell guard in blade takes and six and that kind of thing. So they're willing to make a sacrifice that, say, a pistol grip fencer or another fencer that's more active on the blade would not want to make. But that's one of the little tricks that you will find that people will do in order to get what they are perceiving as an advantage in the setup of their French grip. So, let's back up for a minute, do a quick recap, and understanding this is all opinion. I don't know what the comment section is going to look like after this. It may go on for 14 pages because it's French grip epee fencers, and we tend to do that. And there may be people that have there are people that have their opinions about why a blade should be set up a certain way. I think that it's just between you and your coach and your club armorer to help out as to what is possible, what is legal, and what works for your style of fencing. A more straighter traditional, more bend, more or less cant to the weapon, longer or shorter grip, more weight at the tip of the weapon, more weight at the hand, lighter overall, strong and beefy. You know or are discovering what is working for you, and now you have an idea of options. You have piles of grips available from large to small, bent to straight, heavy to light, flexible to stiff. You have pommels available to you in varying shapes and coverings and materials to give you different weights and help you with indexing of the blade if that's something you want help with. They work together as a unit. You are designing the unit that works best for you. When you discover it and you find your success with that piece, then you want to try and set all your weapons up similarly to one another. Now again, you'll get some arguments there where people say, oh, don't set everything up exactly the same. Here's a secret. I can take exactly the same grip, exactly the same pommel, exactly the same bell guard, blade, pick the blades out for weight and balance and flex and get them all as close as possible and assemble them with exactly the same 2.5 degrees of tang bend or whatever it is I've got. I can use a protractor and I can measure that all out and assemble them all exactly the same. And when I go out to fence with them, they will all feel slightly different. They're all going to be in the same neighborhood and they're all going to rhyme with one another, and it's not going to be super upsetting for me to move from one to the other, but they will feel different. And if experience and observation is any indicator, you'll probably fall in love with one of them. Try not to fall in love with any of them. They're all going to break, and break your heart in the process. And if they do it in the middle of a DE bout and you haven't fenced with your other stuff for 8 weeks because you love this one, well, there's why it broke then. And that's why you're also freaking out right now, because you're going to a weapon that you haven't touched in ages. So rotate your stock, try and set them up as close as possible. That said, in my bag, I always have an epee that's set up quite differently from the other ones. Because sometimes I'm at a tournament and I'm having trouble focusing and I'm having trouble figuring out what's going wrong and I can't think what to change. So I can go change to the different epee, and I've made some change. I've done something positive to affect the situation. It's amazing how much that sort of thing might help. Not because it's a better weapon to fence with than the others, but because in that case it's helped me mentally make a positive change to what I was doing. So, bunches of grips, bunches of pommels, lots of options, lots of ways you can go to stretch the envelope but not break the rules. Have fun with it. Feel free to pepper us with questions. If you want to share your French grip epee setup with a quick photo or something like that, go ahead and send it to social@nwfencing.org, and maybe we'll share a picture of your grip on Facebook or something. Have fun. Enjoy setting up your weapons. Feel free to pepper us with questions. We'll see you for the next one.